Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Backstory. I've been working at this hotel for about 3 years now, and I'm one of only 2 people left who went through the training when our hotel switched franchises back in 2021. During that training, we were briefed on certain company policies that would come into play later. Cast: Sarah, front desk manager, only been here for about 6 months. Me, I consider myself a nice guy. Unless you're a bully or entitled person. Other characters will be introduced as we go along. Story. It was a sweltering summer afternoon in 2023 when I walked in for my 3:11 p.m. shift. The scene that greeted me was unsettling. Both morning shift front desk workers, Emma and Lily, looked like they'd been crying their eyes out, their makeup smeared beyond recognition. Sarah, our manager, was pacing back and forth, clearly fuming. "What's going on?" I asked, concerned. Sarah stopped pacing and turned to me. "We've got a real piece of work staying with us. This guy, he's the highest tier in our rewards program. He's been demanding free upgrades, complimentary services left and right, and screaming at staff every chance he gets. I've had calls from every department complaining about him. And just now, he came down and yelled at Emma and Lily until they broke down in tears." I glanced at Emma and Lily. Both recent high school graduates, they were sweet kids who genuinely loved helping people. They certainly didn't deserve this kind of treatment. As Sarah explained the situation, I pulled up the guest's room details on our system. As soon as I saw his info, a wide grin spread across my face. "Hey, Sarah," I said, "did you notice he's actually an employee at one of our other hotels?" Sarah looked confused. "Yeah, but what does that matter?" I pulled out the employee discount form and pointed to the fine print. "Check this out. When traveling as an employee, you're required to behave respectfully. It's right here in black and white. Failure to do so can lead to suspension or permanent revocation of the employee discount and even termination." Sarah's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," I replied. "You should call this guy's hotel and speak to the GM, explain who you are and what's been going on here." I quickly looked up the hotel's number, dialed, and handed Sarah the phone. After the call ended, Sarah had a satisfied smirk on her face. "His GM is livid. I've never heard someone so angry." Just then, the main switchboard phone rang. I answered. "Thank you for calling Hotel Paradise. How may I direct your call?" A gruff voice responded. "Put me through to Mr. Johnson's room immediately." "Certainly, sir. Have a nice day," I said, transferring the call. I turned to Sarah with a sarcastic grin. "Gee, I wonder who that could be." Sarah chuckled. "The GM gave me his personal cell number. He said to call him immediately if there are any more issues. I'm leaving it by the switchboard just in case." "Well, your revenge is done," I said. "Now for mine." Sarah's eyes widened. "Oh no. What are you planning?" I just smiled and picked up the phone again. "Hello, Hotel Rewards customer service. I'd like to report someone using a rewards account while staying on an employee discount." The customer service rep gasped. "That's not allowed." "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm reporting him." After giving them the necessary information, I hung up and removed Mr. Johnson's rewards number from his stay. Sarah was grinning from ear to ear. "That was brilliant." "Oh, I'm not done yet," I said. "Time to spread the news to all departments that he's no longer a rewards member." I made my rounds, informing each department about the situation. Everyone had the same initial reaction when I mentioned Mr. Johnson's name. "Oh God, what's that jerk done now?" But their faces lit up when I explained he was no longer a rewards member and that his own GM was involved. When I returned to the front desk, Emma and Lily rushed over to give me a big hug, thanking me profusely. Later that night, Mr. Johnson approached the desk, looking considerably more subdued. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "My key doesn't seem to be working." I plastered on my best fake smile. "Oh, I'm so sorry about that, sir. Let me make you a new one right away. Aftermath. The next day I checked Mr. Johnson's rewards account, suspended. A week later, sorry, account number not found." As I was finishing up my shift, Sarah pulled me aside. "Hey, do me a favor?" she asked. "Sure, what's up?" She looked at me seriously. "If I ever piss you off, please come tell me so I can fix the issue. I do not want to be on your bad side." We both laughed, and I headed home feeling pretty good about how things had turned out. The next one is an entitled people's story. My wife and I moved into our new house about 2 years ago. We were excited to start a family in this quiet suburban neighborhood. Everything seemed perfect, until we met our next-door neighbor, Karen. At first, Karen seemed friendly enough. She brought over a welcome basket when we moved in and chatted about the neighborhood. But things took a weird turn when my wife got pregnant. Karen got way too interested in our pregnancy. She was constantly asking my wife invasive questions about her due date, our plans for the nursery, even what we planned to name the baby. We tried to be polite but kept our answers vague. Something about her interest felt off. When our son Tommy was born, Karen's behavior got even stranger. She'd show up uninvited, wanting to hold the baby. She'd criticize how we were caring for him, saying things like, "Oh, you're not doing that right, let me show you." We started avoiding her, making excuses when she came over, but she'd still find ways to corner us, like waiting by our car when we got home from errands. The real trouble started when Tommy was about 6 months old. Karen cornered my wife in the front yard one day while I was at work. She started ranting about how we were unfit parents and how Tommy deserved better. My wife was scared and called me immediately. I left work early and confronted Karen. I told her firmly to leave us alone and stop harassing my family. She just laughed in my face and said, "You can't keep me away from my baby forever." Her baby? What the hell was she talking about? Over the next few weeks, Karen's behavior escalated. She'd stand in her yard staring at our house for hours. We caught her peering in our windows several times. Once, I even found her in our backyard, claiming she was just checking on Tommy. We called the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do unless she actually tried to break in or harm us. They suggested we get security cameras, which we did. Things came to a head about a month later. I was in the backyard with Tommy, pushing him on his little swing. Suddenly, Karen came bursting through our gate. Before I could react, she grabbed Tommy out of the swing and started running. I chased after her, yelling for her to stop. Luckily, our neighbor across the street heard the commotion and blocked Karen's path. I caught up and wrestled Tommy away from her. She was screaming the whole time that Tommy was her son and we had stolen him from her. The police arrived quickly this time. They arrested Karen for attempted kidnapping. As they were putting her in the squad car, she was still yelling about how Tommy belonged to her. We later found out from other neighbors that Karen had lost a baby several years ago. She'd had some mental health issues since then, but no one realized how bad it had gotten. The whole ordeal was terrifying. We immediately filed for a restraining order against Karen. The judge granted it without hesitation given the circumstances. Karen ended up being committed to a psychiatric facility. Her husband, who we'd barely seen before all this, came by to apologize. He explained that Karen had stopped taking her medication months ago, and he hadn't realized how delusional she'd become. We felt bad for what Karen and her husband had been through losing a child, but that didn't excuse her actions or make us feel any safer. We ended up moving a few months later. The stress of living next to Karen, even with her gone, was too much. We found a nice house in another neighborhood and made sure to thoroughly check out our new neighbors before buying. Tommy is 3 now and doesn't remember any of this, thankfully. My wife and I are still a bit paranoid sometimes, always keeping a close eye on him when we're out. But we're working on not letting Karen's actions control our lives. We later heard that Karen got the help she needed and was doing better. I hope that's true and that she's found peace, but I also hope we never cross paths again. Some wounds are just too deep to risk reopening. Looking back, I wish we'd taken Karen's odd behavior more seriously from the start. We could have avoided a lot of stress and fear if we'd set firm boundaries early on. But hindsight is 20/20, I guess. The whole experience taught us to trust our instincts about people and not be afraid to speak up when something feels off. It also showed us the importance of a supportive community. Our neighbors really stepped up to help us through everything. We're happy in our new home now, and Tommy is thriving. But we'll never forget the lesson we learned. Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones hiding under the bed, but the ones living right next door. The next one is a petty revenge story. I just sold my parents' house. I cleared out everything and gave everything a good clean. It had a professional clean when I put it on the market and nobody was living in it since then. It's 2 days post-closing and the new owners blew up the realtor's phone with all the garbage left behind, some crackpot rumors, complaints about some things not working, and the dryness of the yard and some other baseless issues. First, the stuff left behind was house stuff, extra hardwood, extra tile, extra light bulbs. The house has some fancy-ass expensive lights. There was also the middle section of the dining room table, which stayed, and the custom paint colors for the interior, exterior, and trim. Everything was custom when my parents built, so the paint has the specific codes. The crackpot rumors were that I left garbage outside for 3 days and drove away saying, "I don't care." I was back and forth to place a lot clearing, cleaning, stuff I couldn't take or sell I put for free on the road, not garbage. And several days before closing, I paid my neighbor to remove it with his trailer. I had said to him, "I don't care about this stuff, so if nobody takes it, don't worry about it and just take it to the dump and I'll pay for it." When I did my last inspection and cleaning 2 days before closing, nothing was in the driveway. All garbage had been removed. Anything not working had turned up in the home inspection, and the buyers were well aware now they are trying to bill me. As for the dryness of the yard, we live in an arid semi-desert. There is not much I can do about it. The yard hadn't changed much between when it was listed and when it closed. Summers are hot here, weather has been in the high 30s Celsius, and there was a fire nearby. Even though I don't live nearby, 2 hours away, and have 3 kids, I offered to come help clear up some of their complaints. I made sure I took everything not explicitly stated in the contract. So I took all the bulbs, tiles, extra flooring, and paint codes. No way in heck are they ever going to match properly. I also took a very expensive BBQ grill that was hooked up to the natural gas. It's a very nice grill, but my current residence doesn't have a natural gas hookup, and honestly I don't have much interest in BBQing, but I know the new owners remarked on it, so I thought I'd be nice and leave it for them. The other thing that isn't explicitly stated was a large metal gazebo shading the back patio. It's the perfect size for back there. It was a pain for me to remove, so I thought the new owners would enjoy it, especially since the back patio, and enormous back windows, face west. In the summer it gets god-awful hot, and without that patio there, they will be sweating enough to fill a bathtub. The next one is a malicious compliance story. My girlfriend was having issues with her micromanaging boss and made me remember this orchestrated malicious compliance we did back around 2003-04 when I was working for a consulting company. The client we were working for was a bank that had us working from the 2 basement, which consisted on a warehouse full with ATM replacements parts and another retrofitted warehouse with desks for us. You can imagine the type: flickering neon lights, ventilation columns. Only thing resembling a window was a poster of a window the consulting company hung up on one wall. Cell phones weren't that common then, internet was kinda on, but everything was blocked because of the bank's firewall. We had to access Google via IP address. Working there was hard, only distraction was having a talk around the water cooler and going upstairs to get a coffee. We were like 30 people, split into 2 big teams doing COBOL and 1 smaller one doing web, .NET, and whatever else somebody asked the manager to deliver. I was part of the smaller one. The client asked us to track how long it took to finish each task. This was handled by each of the 3 team leaders, and people had a little bit of leeway on how to report hours spent. So each team member would tell team leader whenever a task was finished and how long it took. It worked pretty well because team leaders were chill and the guys were serious and didn't slack much. The manager, let's call him micromanager since he was all about micromanaging, but also because he was short AF, calls me one. I was kind of jack of all trades back then, and my team leader, TL as in team leader, but also he was tall AF, so too long, one day, and says, "Look guys, I have a feeling we are not working hard enough. I need to be able to report the exact amount of time we spend on each task to the client. I want you to have some kind of software so people can input the time they spend on each thing." TL tries to explain that the current system in place works rather well and there's no need to change the status quo, that the numbers were accurate and such. Micromanager says that it's not enough, that people are wasting time and he wants accurate tracking. I was like 22, 23 at that time, first job. But TL had a knack for malicious compliance. So he designed the system. It consisted on a little traffic light in the taskbar. Red meant you were assigned, yellow meant a temporary stop, green meant unassigned. In order to change from one color to the other, a pop-up appeared and you had to input the reason for the change. Then we created a web page that summarized and presented the data anonymously. It also had an export button so Micromanager could check and use it to report himself faster than how the team leaders were doing it. At least that was Micromanager's idea. We installed this in every computer and showed how it worked to Micromanager. He was happy and told us to explain the system to the team in order to start the trial run of the idea right away. So we did. TL gathered every single team member and told them that Micromanager wanted an exact tracking of each one. He repeated time and time again the word exact, like probably 50 times in 5 minutes. He also said that the next day would be a trial run for the software, so 30 team members understood right away and complied in an exact way. Here's an example on some of the things I remember. I might remember some of this one's a little embellished, it's been a while. As highlights from the report, with time added up after the trial day: arrival, taking code off, no hanger available, Tried to hang it on top of other coat, both fell. 5 minutes. Cough attack, had to get a glass of water. 5 minutes. Joke, morale booster. 2 minutes. Lost track of thought, realized I was looking at the poster of a window instead of a window. 3 minutes. Gone to the toilet. This was like 400 minutes or so, 30 people, 2 times in the day or so. Discussing last night's football match, 50 minutes, air too cold, had to ask maintenance to up the temp. 4 minutes. Somebody asked temp to up the temp, now everybody is sweating, had to ask them to lower temp. 2 minutes. Inputting change of state in traffic light app, something like 2 hours in total. And the list kept going and going and going. The real data was also there, but it was practically unusable. Before leaving the office, TL called his team and we had a really good laugh reading the list. The next day when we arrived, Micromanager called TL, told him something, and TL asked me to uninstall the traffic light app from every computer. The next one is an entitled people's story. I'm sitting in my office right now trying to work. I work remotely, and I can hear my family in the backyard having a pool party that has been in planning for a week. A pool party I did not know about until last night. I have a large house with an in-ground pool, and I've always told my family they can come over, but to let me know ahead of time. This year, no one has used the pool, so I haven't done a lot of upkeep on it. I have a salt system, so it stays fairly balanced on its own. But I've been really busy with work, so I haven't used it myself. Last night, I was talking to my mother, and she said, "Well, I will see you tomorrow." I asked what she meant by that, and she said for the pool party. After digging, I found out that my brother was planning on coming over the following day to use my pool. He was bringing his daughters and had coordinated with my sister to have her kids come over as well. Since my sister and her husband worked during the day, my parents would be bringing them by. I asked how long this had been in planning, and my mom said for at least a few days now, and they were just figuring out which day was best. My sister, my parents live with her, overheard the conversation and texted me to verify I knew about all of this and was surprised to find out I did not know. She texted our brother subtly asking if he had coordinated all of this with me. 5 minutes later, I get a text from my brother saying he planned to come swimming the next day with one of his daughters, but he would be very quiet since they know I work at home. So around 11:30 a.m., my brother shows up with his oldest daughter. I said hello, but went back to work. That is when he mentioned the extra people would be there. At first, I didn't care that much since everyone was family and they had seen my house messy before. Then he mentions his daughter's boyfriend is coming too. He said, well, she asked if he could come, so I said yes. I love my family, but they really drive me nuts sometimes. It is not usually a big deal if my family comes over. But the fact that my brother coordinated things with other people, his ex-wife, my sister, my parents, and never thought to ask me if it was okay, is just infuriating. And then to invite complete strangers as well. The next one is an entitled parent story. I'm currently in Japan returning tomorrow, and I'm already feeling my life go back to hell the more I talk to my parents. The stress train begins with my parents already making me feel like a failure when I'm just looking for support. I've sacrificed so much for them, but it's never enough. I was thinking of doing online classes to get a head start for next semester, but since I'm so close to graduation, there aren't many options left online for my advanced levels. So I asked my mom for assistance because she's a college advisor at a different school. Instead of actual help, she sent a belittling text. The text went as such. Me. I think I could handle 2 more classes because most of classes are online this semester and seem easy. Do you think you could help me find these classes online at different school? My advisor said they do not offer these online in the fall here. Mom. This is why I was trying to get you to do more hours the past 2 years. Me. I did 15 hours every semester since I started school. But okay, never mind. Then Mom left me on read. I understand I was rude, but I felt completely insulted by that. Will they ever understand what I've done to get where I am? I'm a recovered dyslexic with extreme ADHD, and being where I am should be a miracle, but it's never good enough. I went to community college to save money. It was free where I went, while they let my sister go straight to a 4-year school. I took 15 hours every semester. The minimum at my university is 9 hours, and also did winter and summer classes. My sister failed the same class 4 times in others, while I've never failed a class. I've had steady jobs and have never been fired. I'm currently working full-time at the university to save money. My sister just got fired from her 3rd job in 2 months. She can't make friends to find a roommate for college, so I offered for her to live with me, even though she has done terrible things to me, to help my parents save money. Despite all this, we're seen as equally bad, and I'm considered lazy for not doing more. I'm being held to a completely different standard, and it's making me realize that being here in Japan, with limited contact, has relieved my stress because I can use not contacting my family as a tangible excuse. I feel bad for feeling this way. This is my second post here because I just needed a vent. The next story is titled, "It's important to address the ongoing debate surrounding the role of landlords." While I understand the controversy, my intention is to shed light on my personal experience with a landlord who proved to be much more than just a contentious figure. Let me share the harrowing tale that unfolded in my life. Renting an apartment had seemed like a convenient choice until I discovered that my landlord and I were destined to clash from the start. Although it shouldn't have mattered, he took our differences to a personal level. Several months after moving in, I encountered significant issues that were his responsibility to resolve, as stated in the lease. These were no minor inconveniences. The stove malfunctioned, and the water flowing from the shower turned an unsettling shade of brown. Yet, his reaction was one of anger and hostility. It was evident that he no longer desired me as a tenant, and believed he could make my life miserable enough to drive me away. Among his tactics was appearing unannounced, using fabricated excuses like measurements or inspections. I caught him on multiple occasions invading my privacy, rummaging through my personal belongings without proper notice. While I'm aware landlords have certain rights, my lease clearly stated that unless it was an emergency, he was obligated to provide prior notice. Unfortunately, one fateful day, he took his audacity too far. That evening, I went out with friends, leaving my car parked in its usual spot and my keys safely within my apartment. However, upon returning home, I was met with an alarming sight. The car was missing. Panic set in as I frantically searched for my keys, only to discover they were nowhere to be found. Certain items were misplaced, and I received a call from the police informing me that my car had been involved in a hit-and-run accident. Perplexed, I clarified that no one was authorized to drive my car, but I was instructed to come to the scene to resolve the situation. Summoning an Uber, I arrived at the designated location, only to find my beloved vehicle, once a symbol of freedom, wrapped around a tree. Filing a stolen car report, I left it in the hands of the authorities and returned home, exhausted and disheartened. That night, while trying to process the ordeal, I heard a familiar voice on the other side of my door. It was the landlord. Drunk and belligerent, he demanded entry, proclaiming that something had happened while he had borrowed my car. Indignant, I ordered him to leave, threatening to involve the police. He responded by kicking down my door, brandishing my car keys in a taunting manner. Shocked and furious, I struggled to comprehend his audacity. According to his slurred account, he had taken my car without permission, under the misguided belief that as the owner of the apartment, he could help himself to my possessions. Refusing to back down, I reiterated my demand for him to leave, but he resorted to violence, launching a series of punches towards me. Acting in self-defense, I managed to fend him off and finally evicted him from my home. Though he had broken the lock, leaving it in disarray, I counted myself fortunate that he hadn't caused further damage. While I barricaded myself inside, the landlord dialed police, falsely accusing me of assault and requesting my removal from the premises. Astonishingly, the man who had stolen my car and violated my personal space had the audacity to call the police on me for defending myself in my own home. Refusing to open the door until the authorities arrived, I felt a mix of apprehension and hope that justice would prevail. Knocking resumed at my door, and I cautiously greeted the police officers, hoping they would listen to my side of the story. However, their initial stance seemed unfavorable. One of the officers sternly addressed me, emphasizing that as a renter I was occupying the landlord's property. They explained that physically assaulting a landlord could lead to eviction. Shocked and frustrated, I vehemently asserted that I had been the victim, highlighting the landlord's violent intrusion, the car theft, and the subsequent crash. The officer remained skeptical, asking for any evidence that could support my claims. Realizing I had installed a camera in my apartment, I eagerly informed them of its existence. The landlord immediately objected, exclaiming that I had no right to record within the premises. Nevertheless, the officers, determined to uncover the truth, requested to review the footage. While they escorted the landlord outside, I anxiously watched the video alongside the remaining officer. The footage confirmed my account, unveiling the landlord's unauthorized entry, his rummaging through my belongings, and the brazen act of stealing my car keys. It also documented his violent assault when I attempted to protect myself. The evidence left no room for doubt, and the officer's demeanor swiftly shifted in my favor. Once the landlord was back inside, his face pale and the confidence in his eyes diminished. The officers informed him of his impending arrest. He was charged with auto theft, drunk and disorderly conduct, and drunk driving. Furthermore, he was required to compensate me for the value of my totaled car, which would go toward purchasing a new one. The plea he had made for my eviction was outright denied, and he was held responsible for replacing the broken door, as it failed to meet safety standards. The landlord's arrest marked the end of his tyrannical reign over the property. Forced to sell the building due to his incarceration, a new landlord stepped in, one who proved to be reasonable and respectful throughout my tenure there. Finally, I could breathe a sigh of relief, knowing I no longer had to endure the constant fear and mistreatment at the hands of my previous landlord. Reflecting on the incident, I understand the initial skepticism of the police officers, whose duty it is to adhere to protocol and assess situations objectively. They were quick to rectify their stance once presented with undeniable evidence. I harbor no resentment towards them, as their ultimate goal was to uphold justice. My hope is that this incident serves as a reminder that not all landlords are abusive or unscrupulous, but it highlights the dire need for responsible and ethical practices within the rental industry. As for the former landlord, he received a 1-year prison sentence. I can only hope that during his time behind bars he would reflect on his actions and refrain from further harm. It's a reminder that actions have consequences, and no one is above the law. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My uncle has always been a self-righteous, petty slimeball with a foul temper and a grandiose idea of his own importance, but little to no brains. My dad always just took it and tried to keep the peace because family is so important to him. This is the story of how my uncle finally pushed my dad too far and ended up getting arrested for his trouble. It is pretty long since it covers several months of a feud between them. As background, my dad and my uncle are neighbors in a rural community of around 600 people. My dad built the house my uncle lives in and sold it along with a small plot. So my dad's remaining land is about 6 acres and runs along the side and the back of my uncle's smaller property. My uncle is a dealer for HVAC units. My dad is in the HVAC business and would buy some things from his brother, even though his brother's prices were higher and he had a more limited inventory than other dealers, in order to help his brother out. My dad also rented a building his brother owned and used it as his shop office. He only rented the building and parking lot, but in the field out behind the shop, my uncle and my dad both would collect old HVAC units. These things are rusty and all around ugly, but when they didn't have anything else to do, they could go get one of these old units to break down for scrap. This story starts when one day my dad went to his brother and said he needed a certain unit, but his brother quoted him a really high price and also couldn't deliver it in the time frame my dad needed. So my dad called up another dealer he works with, and that guy had a unit on hand to give him for a much lower price. A no-brainer. My uncle found out about this somehow. Guys in the HVAC business are apparently like gossipy teenage girls, and confronted my dad, basically giving him an ultimatum that if my dad wouldn't commit to buying 100% of his units from my uncle, then my uncle wouldn't sell him anything. I already told you my uncle is an idiot. So my dad didn't say anything to his brother, but he took him at his word and stopped buying anything from him. A month or so later, my uncle showed up at my dad's shop and confronted him again, wanting to know why my dad hadn't ordered anything from him that month. When my dad told him why, my uncle exploded. They apparently had a screaming match, and in the end, my uncle announced that my dad was no longer his brother, they were no longer doing business together, and my dad was evicted from the shop. I will note that legally my dad was not evicted because evicting him would have required a legal notice, a certain period of time, etc. But my dad was over it, so he said fine and began converting the barn at his house into his new shop. So my uncle, who apparently had thought my dad would not call his bluff, showed back up at the shop a few days later and informed my dad that he also has to move all of the old HVAC units scattered around in the field behind the property, or he would sue my dad for the cost of removal. Now this too probably had no legal power since my dad's lease was only on the building, not the field, and my uncle contributed to and used the old units as communal property. But when my dad is pissed off, he is really pissed off. So he agreed to move the old units. He took his tractor over and loaded each one onto his flatbed trailer, drove out behind his barn, and painstakingly arranged hundreds of rusty, ugly old HVAC units an inch or two off the property line at the back of my uncle's house. Note that my dad could not see these things from his house due to the way his property is set up, but my uncle had an HD view of them in his backyard. My uncle started being even more of a creep than usual and was always spying on my dad's house, so my dad decided to build a privacy fence down the side of his property that runs along my uncle's property, but not the back of the property where the HVAC units are. The fence guys arrived and worked for a few hours before my uncle came screeching into his driveway and exploded out of his truck, already screaming because these poor fence guys had laid posts or tools or whatever temporarily on his side of the property line as they were building the fence. My uncle called the police, who basically told the fence guys, "Okay, dudes, just don't put anything on this crazy man's property," and left. The next day, apparently, someone left a hammer across the property line, so here comes my uncle screaming at them again. He called the police again, but by the time they got there, the guy had already moved his hammer, so the police were just annoyed by this point, but could only warn them not to do it again. Later that afternoon, my uncle called the police a third time. I kid you not. This time, he wanted to report that my dad had stolen a backhoe from him, like one that attaches to the back of a tractor. One that, again, I kid you not, my uncle had given to my dad 2 whole years prior, because my uncle didn't even have a tractor big enough to attach the thing to. The cop was not amused when this story came to light, and since it was the same cop who'd been there earlier that day, she was beyond annoyed at that point. My dad helpfully said, "Come get the backhoe if you want it," knowing full well my uncle had no way to pick the thing up, or haul it even the few feet to his own yard. My uncle replied that my dad was just trying to trap him and would say he was trespassing if my uncle came onto his land, even though the cop was standing right there when my dad offered, and by the way, this conversation was taking place in my dad's driveway. He then said that he wanted to file a complaint with the police that basically amounts to a restraining order against my dad. It isn't a restraining order because it isn't issued by a judge, but the cops treat it that way. It's for habitual trespassers. Annoyed cop helpfully informed my dad that this would mean that even if my uncle texted or emailed him and invited him to come over to his house to discuss things, even if my dad had that written proof he'd been invited, if my uncle called the cops or even took a picture of my dad on his property, he could potentially get arrested for trespassing. My dad said he wanted to file one against his brother, too. The pro-revenge part of the story is now upon us. My dad knew full well that his brother had no real clue where the property lines were and was not going to dig up his survey to check. He only knew where the lines were because my dad knows exactly where they are and maintains wooden stakes in the ground periodically along his property lines. So when his brother was away for a few days, my dad moved all of the old HVAC units along the property line over further onto his own property by a few feet, and moved the stakes back the same distance. So basically, it looked the same as it had before, except it looked like the property line was a few feet further back than it actually is. He then placed some random piece of scrap across the fake property line, still on his own property, but it looked like it was across the property line if all you had to go by were the incorrectly placed stakes. Set up a few game cameras aimed at the line, and waited. Sure enough, his dumbass brother came storming out of his house as soon as he noticed this scrap on his side of the property line, crossed the real property line to get a good look at the scrap, and called the police. My dad was waiting for them with his survey showing where the actual property line is, a copy of the report annoyed cop had given him, and game camera footage of his brother clearly trespassing on his land. It was my uncle who got arrested. The only way his revenge for all the trouble and heartache his brother caused could possibly have been any sweeter would have been if it were an annoyed cop who showed up at the scene and arrested my uncle. Alas, he had to make do with someone he and his brother had both gone to high school with, which worked out since it was especially embarrassing for my uncle to be arrested by someone he knew well, and who could make sure everyone else in town knew. Edited to add, nothing really came of my uncle's arrest, or at least not that my dad has heard about, and he'd hear about it since this is a town of around 600 people. But it was probably enough for my uncle just to have to get put into handcuffs, spend a night in jail, and have people know about it because my uncle hasn't caused any more trouble for my dad other than generally existing, where my dad occasionally has to see his truck drive by. My uncle is also now in a business dispute with his wife's sister and his brother-in-law, so presumably he is trying to take his anger out on another target who hasn't already beaten him, and also who isn't his older and much larger brother who has been perfectly willing to beat his ass all their lives whenever it's devolved into physical disputes. Yes, my family are rednecks. My uncle, aunt, cousin, and my cousin's wife all unfriended me on social media, so I only know what's going on with them via small-town gossip nowadays. My sister was driving down the road recently, saw my uncle in his yard and waved at him. He turned away like he didn't know her. None of us got an announcement when my cousin's wife had her baby recently. So I think the end of the story is just that we are all dead to my uncle and his family, but he is too afraid to do anything besides pretend we all don't exist. The next one is a petty revenge story. I come from a family of 6. My parents, my older sister, my older brother, my little brother, and me. Often, in order to bribe us into good behavior, our parents would buy us our favorite candy to munch on in the car. Now, I've never exactly been a giving person, not huge on sharing just for the sake of sharing. My parents, however, were trying to raise respectful and generous kids, and often forced me to share things even when I didn't want to. That's all fine and good, except that my sister abused this system. See, she would say she didn't want a bag of candy, then once we were on the road, she'd start taking candy from all 3 of the brothers. That really pissed me off. I didn't get candy often, as my mom didn't like feeding us sugary food, so when I got my own bag of Sour Patch watermelon, I wanted to eat every last one myself. Besides, my parents would always offer to buy her a bag of candy for herself. She would just refuse because she knew she could leech off the rest of us. So after a point, I started refusing her requests for candy, but that didn't fly with my mom because that was being selfish, so she would force me to hand over the candy. One time, I even said when I purchased my bag at CVS, "Sister, I'm not going to give you any of my candy. If you want Sour Patch, buy your own right now." "I'm fine," she responded. "I don't want a whole bag of candy." Fast forward 20 minutes into the car ride, my father was requisitioning a candy to give to my sister as I sat fuming. This went on for years. My whole life, really, and I hated it. I would hide my candy when I got it. I would try to keep it out of her reach, but always a parent would intervene. Fast forward to my sister's college graduation. She's now 22. I am a senior in high school at this point, and we're up at her school at a fancy restaurant celebrating after she'd graduated that morning. In attendance are all immediate and some extended family, some close friends of my sister, and her long-term boyfriend, who I was meeting for the first time. So, enough people for the following to be embarrassing to my family. Our meal ends, and my mother offers to buy a nice dessert for anyone who wants it. My brothers, my dad, and I all take her up on it. I ordered a vanilla bean cheesecake with a burnt sugar bird's nest on top. My mother repeatedly offers to buy my sister anything she wants, but my sister says she couldn't possibly eat a full dessert right now and turns it down every time. The food arrives, and everyone is staring at mine. I'm sitting right at the head of the table in full view of everyone, so it's hard not to look. Aside from the cake slice being large and delicious looking, the burnt sugar bird's nest is huge and ornate, hollow on the inside like an old-timey brass globe or some object. Honestly, it was pretty impressive, and right as the food gets placed in front of us, my sister says, "I'll just have a bite of everyone's." At this point, I'm seeing red, having flashbacks to all the times my food has been stolen. Logically, the right thing to do would have been to just hand over one bite. I mean, it was her graduation, it was a huge cake, it wouldn't have been a loss, but it had become a matter of principle. So, the moment she says this, in one fell swoop, in full view of everyone at the table, I sweep up my slice of cheesecake and stuff the entire thing into my mouth at once, shattering the sugar nest, crumbs falling everywhere in front of my whole family and some college students close to my sister whom I had never met in my life. My sister stares, appalled, and says, "Did you do that just so I wouldn't get any?" And I look at her, cheeks ballooning out like a chipmunk, face covered in cheesecake and graham, dead in the eyes, and nod. There was a fair bit of shocked silence at that moment and in the very tense car ride home. But to this day, she never asks for anything from me anymore. The next one is an entitled people story. So I, 21M, have an ex, Angelica, 20F. Angelica and I had an on and off relationship since we were about 15, but got serious when COVID hit, and I had to move back to my hometown. We got an apartment together, and very soon after, she started spending a lot of time with her cousin. Long story short, she's involved romantically with her cousin. We broke up. We've been broken up for 9 months at this point. For 7 of those months, her phone has been on my phone bill, and she owes me over $500. Fine. Whatever. I'll never see that $500, and she always makes excuses to pay me back. That's life. It's my own fault for letting her keep using me as a cash cow. She also took my car when we broke up, and I let her because I was too afraid she would try to take my apartment too. Anyway, it's 9 months past our breakup. I get a message. Hey, I'm pregnant. I'm on my way home from work, so I don't respond. That is 9 months past being my problem. It's not my baby. She messages me again. My boyfriend, the one she cheated on me with, and I have nowhere to stay. Still 9 months past my problem. Angelica has never worked a day in her life. She lives off the disability check from her boyfriend and spends 99% of it on weed and fast food. She never paid rent and is documented to never pay rent. Anyway, she tells me, my name is still on the lease. We're going to move in September. I tell her, your name is not on the lease. It was renewed last month and I took your name off. I'm sorry. She messages me, calling me an a-hole and saying she's moving in because she has nowhere for her baby and 3 dogs to stay. Mind you, my apartment is more like a studio and barely fits me, let alone 2 other people and 3 dogs. I tell her it's not happening. I'm moving out of town soon anyway. Also, she needs to come pick up her crap that she's left at my apartment for 9 months. She says no, and if I throw it away, she's going to press charges. I tell her it doesn't matter, because when I move, I'm throwing it away. She later called my landlord and told him I was planning to move out. I got upset at this and told her I ran the numbers on the car. It's still in my name. Get the car out of my name now or I'm repossessing it. Alternatively, she can leave me alone. She started bawling on a call, asking how I could do this to her and her unborn child, and I was condemning her and her child to be homeless. She also still has a gun in my name that I told her to give back or I'm calling the cops. I'm really considering repossessing the car since it was mine from the start and is still in my name. She doesn't deserve to get a free car handed to her. She needs to wake up. She keeps saying she needs a place to stay. I'm ruining her and her baby's life. It's literally my apartment that she has never once paid rent on. I don't know how she thinks she's entitled to just live in my apartment with the guy she cheated on me with and 3 dogs. I hope the baby ends up okay. It's not its fault its mother is a spoiled brat. But I also hope that being homeless and without a car wakes her the hell up. Tiny update. My friend said his ex is coming to pick up her stuff tomorrow and return the gun. If he gets shot, I'll let you guys know, I guess. Update. She and her boyfriend, fake cousin, came to my friend's apartment, returned the gun, and picked up her stuff. Her boyfriend then proceeded to wave his own gun around and demand to be put back on the lease. That's not how it works. My friend called the cops, but they left before the authorities arrived. I'm not sure about the rest. Alright, final update. The phone is not on the phone bill, her stuff is out of his apartment, his gun is returned, the dog is in his possession, but he still doesn't have the car. He said it's not worth it at this point. My friend asked for no charges, so I doubt anything will happen. He said he's cutting her out of his life, no contact. I'm personally upset about the car, but there's nothing to be done about it now. The next story is titled, I believe that farmers around the world need to stand together to overcome an unforeseen evil that has emerged in our midst. As a proud farmer residing in the Republic of Belarus, I have witnessed the transformation of the once fertile farmland into housing, attracting entitled individuals who fail to understand the true essence of a farmer's life. They perceive us as mere caretakers of cows, oblivious to the immense dedication and hard work we invest to sustain our livelihoods. One such neighbor, a city dweller who recently moved in next to my farm, epitomizes this misunderstanding. He holds the erroneous belief that farmers are ignorant and simple-minded. Little does he know about the intricate financial calculations we undertake to keep our farms afloat. But that's not the main issue at hand. Let me delve into the situation that led to our confrontation. Times have been tough for everyone in our area, and this neighbor of mine had a bright idea. He decided to convert his house into a makeshift hotel, with multiple small rooms for guests to sleep and dine. However, the absence of a proper parking lot posed a significant challenge for him. Seeking to exploit my land, he approached me with a proposal. Neighbor, hey, I noticed you have some vacant land. It seems ideal for my guests' parking. Can I use it? Me, and what are you offering in return? Neighbor, Money? None. It's just empty space, and I thought I could utilize it. If you think you can intimidate me into paying, you're mistaken. Me. Unless you're willing to rent the space and compensate me, you cannot allow people to park there. Should you attempt otherwise, rest assured they will be towed before they even wake up. Naturally, my neighbor wasn't pleased with my response. Failing to coerce me, he resorted to purchasing a fleet of dilapidated cars, junkers beyond repair. To emphasize his audacity, he taped a threatening note to my door, warning me against crossing him. He believed he had connections and presented himself as a member of a notorious gang or mafia, hoping I would succumb to his intimidation. However, I refused to be swayed by empty bluster. Enraged by his actions and threats, I decided to inquire about the legality of abandoned vehicles on my property. I contacted a local scrapyard, seeking guidance on the matter. I discovered that if the cars were genuinely derelict, they could be sent to the scrapyard without much hassle. Legally, they were deemed abandoned, and I didn't need to involve the police or file any reports. Satisfied with this information, I arranged for the car's removal within a couple of days. During that time, my neighbor grew overconfident and, in an act of sheer insolence, parked his brand new luxury car across my driveway, obstructing my passage. Although it was technically on my property and parked illegally, it presented an opportunity for me to teach him a lesson in manners. That same day, as the scrapyard employee arrived to tow away the abandoned cars, I seized the moment and utilized my tractor to flatten my neighbor's ostentatious vehicle. Reduced to scrap, it joined the other cars in their journey to the scrapyard. As the last car was being loaded, my neighbor rushed out of his house, unleashing a torrent of screams. He frantically dialed the police, falsely accusing me of stealing his car and dismantling it for spare parts. However, my friend, the scrapyard employee, departed, knowing he was well within his rights. Meanwhile, I patiently awaited the arrival of the police, ready to handle the situation head-on. Neighbor: he took away all of my cars. I want him arrested for theft. Officer: is this true? Me: I have photographic evidence showing that these cars were abandoned on my property without any indication of ownership. I waited for several days to see if anyone would claim them, but no one did. Given their dilapidated condition, it was evident that they were junkers dumped on my land. If you'd like, I can show you the photos as proof. Neighbor: that's bullcrap. He knew they were mine. Officer: calm down. Based on the evidence and the laws regarding abandoned vehicles, it appears that he had every right to have them removed from his property. Leaving your cars on someone else's land is not a wise decision. Is there anything else? Me: actually, I have a quick question regarding the regulations governing business operations in this community. You see, my neighbor converted his house into a hotel without obtaining the necessary licenses. Would such an enterprise require legal permits if, hypothetically, I were to consider a similar venture? My question piqued the interest of the officers, prompting them to delve deeper into my neighbor's illegal business activities. It soon became evident that he had violated numerous laws, including the failure to register his establishment as a business and evade taxation. Swiftly, his illicit operation was shut down, leaving him burdened with hefty fines and legal consequences. At this point, his anger towards me intensified, leading him to pay yet another visit to my farm in a fit of rage. Neighbor: I warned you not to mess with me. You have no idea who you're dealing with, farm boy. I'll show you the consequences of provoking someone like me. Sleep with one eye open. Me: you talk a big game, but I haven't seen any substantial action from you. Let me make one thing clear. If you ever trespass on my property again, I will have you arrested. If you dare to threaten or attempt any harm towards me, you'll come face to face with the barrel of my shotgun. With my resolute response, my neighbor hastily retreated to his house, overwhelmed by his mounting problems. The local authorities scrutinized his illicit activities, ensuring that he faced the full consequences of his actions. As for me, I remained undisturbed, unyielding in my belief that nobody should trample upon the hard-working farmers who sustain our communities. Months passed, and news of my neighbor's misfortunes continued to circulate. The local government imposed severe penalties on him, requiring him to appear before a judge to answer for his transgressions. Suffice it to say, he had more than enough on his plate, and dealing with me was the least of his concerns. No visits from mysterious mafias or gangs ever materialized, confirming my safety and reaffirming the power of standing up against those who attempt to exploit and intimidate. The next one is a pro-revenge story. A while back, my grandparents, who have lived in the same house for decades, got new neighbors. It was a wife and husband with 2 kids, and they seemed fairly nice. The husband spoke to my grandfather a few times when they were outside and seemed genuine. He said he was a correctional officer, so his hours were strange, and he might be coming and going at odd hours depending on the schedule. A few months later, they went on vacation and asked my grandfather to watch their house for them, making sure no one was lurking around or breaking in. A few days into their vacation, my grandfather heard their dog whining in the backyard. So he looked over their fence and found the dog tied up on about a 6-foot lead with no water around. He couldn't get into the yard, so he called animal control, who came and took the dog. When the neighbors got home, the husband went ballistic. He hit my grandparents' door so hard they thought it was going to break. He got in my grandfather's face, called him every ugly word he could come up with, and told him that if he ever caught him outside on his own, he'd make him pay for making them lose their dog. It only escalated from there. In the middle of the night, someone took the large community dumpster from the back alley and threw it over the fence into my grandparents' pool. The kids threw eggs from their backyard all over my grandparents' back patio and house. Someone threw a grapefruit through my grandparents' window. The police were called every time but said we couldn't prove who was doing it, and they weren't caught in the act, so there was nothing they could do. I had enough, and I started making calls up the ladder with the correctional institution. I spoke to the warden at his facility, and I was told he would look into the issue. A few days later, he showed up again at my grandparents' house while I was there, going off again, and this time threatening harm to my grandfather again to teach me a lesson about trying to mess with his life. I went out the door to confront him, and he walked off and told me he wasn't going to hit me because he'd lose his job and I wasn't worth it. But he proceeded to continue screaming and threatening me and my grandfather as he walked back to his house. This time, though, I was ready for this prick, and I was recording everything from the moment he started slamming on the door. I called and spoke to the warden again and told him I had video evidence of the threats and this guy's general volatile nature. A week later, 2 guys showed up at my grandparents' house and said they worked for the associate director of corrections. They sat down for over an hour with my grandparents and wanted to know every detail of events that had happened, so they were told everything from the dog to the vandalism to the threats. I came over and showed them the video I had taken, and we showed them copies of the police reports we had filed. Apparently this guy had an issue with his temper, among other things, and was here because he had been told to take a transfer or be terminated from his previous facility. So they had transferred him here. He ended up losing his job, and his house was foreclosed on. My grandparents were given an order of protection. We never saw them again. They left in the middle of the night, not long after we met with the director people. That prick, his wife, who swore at my grandfather and always glared at him, and their 2 kids, 17 and 14, who I know had a lot to do with the vandalism happening to my grandparents' house. Duck them. Thankfully, since they left, all is well. My grandparents have since gotten new neighbors who are wonderful people and own a local restaurant. They have even brought food over to my grandparents a few times and have proven to be excellent neighbors. The next one is a petty revenge story. About a decade ago, I worked an early morning shift at a fast food restaurant. We opened at 6 a.m., so I had to be at work at 5 a.m. I would leave my house at about 4:45 a.m. every morning. My management was pretty relaxed about the opening shift. Clocking in up to 10 minutes late wasn't really an issue, as long as you showed up ready to go. I came outside at 4:45 to find that a local police officer had pulled someone over and was now blocking my driveway. This had happened before, but usually in the afternoon, and usually I would just ask the officer to move forward or back a couple of feet, and then I could pull into or out of the driveway. No sweat. This officer, however, angrily informed me that I would have to wait until he was done. I snapped a picture of his car, texted it to my manager, and explained my tardiness. 40 minutes later, the police officer finally moved. I scrambled into the car and headed to work. I got there 15 minutes before we opened. I frantically started to brew tea, fetch ice, having to condense my 50-minute routine into 15. I almost forgot to brew coffee. Opening time rolled around, and the first group of customers came in. It was a group of our local police officers, led by the captain. I guess they were about to do a shift change. One of the officers in the group was the one who blocked my driveway. Anyway, the captain ordered coffee, and I regretfully informed him that there was a 5-minute wait on coffee because I got to work extremely late. The captain asked why, so I pulled out my phone and explained that one of his officers had blocked my driveway for 45 minutes for a routine traffic stop. The captain proceeded to chew out that officer in front of all of his colleagues and exclaimed that nothing short of a life or death emergency should block my driveway if it would interfere with him getting his morning coffee. It was never blocked again, and the captain always got his coffee at 6 a.m., without interruption. The next one is an entitled people story. So let me tell you a tale of two punk-ass dumbbells and their crappy parents. To really set the stage, though, allow me to talk about these two geniuses and their friends. They were part of a group of around 10 kids aged between 12 and 15 years old. These kids were your typical group of young British yobs who always spent their time together, committing varying degrees of criminal mischief and occasionally crossing a line to more serious crime. Now, the reason I paint you this picture is so you know that no matter what you read next, you know I'm not the a-hole. I'm a delivery driver for Uber Eats, and I drive a motorbike. It's a big old bike for sure, despite only being a 500cc bike. So I park up at a popular spot for both the delivery drivers, who work there, and the yobs, who terrorize the locals. So I go into the nearby KFC to pick up another order for the night. As I do, two of these yobs decided that they like my bike. So much so, they wanted to see if they can play a real-life version of GTA, and my bike was the vehicle of choice. I'm in the KFC waiting for the order, and they are jumping on the bike, thinking it would be easy. One sticks a penknife into my ignition barrel on the bike and starts the engine. One of the other drivers pops his head in and shouts, "Hey, OP, someone's trying to steal your bike!" I immediately run outside just in time to watch the kid in the driver's seat kick off the side stand. Now here's the thing. When you ride a motorcycle, you need to plant a foot on the ground to support the weight of the bike before pushing off. You need to set the gears, and it's impossible to do so and not keep a foot on the ground. So he's got himself and a pillion passenger on the back, both with no helmets and on a bike that weighed 4 or 5 times himself. Between himself, the bike, and his friend, it was easily 300 kg he needed to hold up, and because he didn't know what he was doing, the second he kicked off the side stand, it toppled over on him. His friend was thrown off the bike and cracked his head open, and he had his leg and half his torso crushed under 225 kg of biking metal. The second that he dropped his fellow yobs, booked it down the street and abandoned him and his friend. I called the cops and an ambulance while canceling my KFC order pickup. I checked on the friend and his head was gushing. Police had gotten good at responding to the yobs because of how much trouble they were. In context, they had responded and moved these kids on over 120 times in under a month for a whole litany of crimes, ranging from trespassing to GBH. Serious assaults if you're American. In the past week, they had responded to 10 different vandalism calls and 6 GBH cases. So, they see these two geniuses on the ground and me doing my best to use a wad of napkins as a makeshift bandage to hold the blood in. Police ask me what happened and I say, they tried stealing my bike and found out it's not the same as the video games. They don't know it yet, but I'm pressing charges, and they're facing consequences this time. I wasn't really bothered about being nice, as they did try stealing my livelihood and my pride and joy. The cops looked stunned by my disregard for the fact that they were dealing with 2 young people who were seriously injured. And the following conversation ensues. Cop 1 asked, "Are you sure you want to do that? They're injured and they're just kids after all." Sternly I said, "Yes, their age does not negate the fact that they committed serious crimes." Cop 2 pleaded, "But you might screw up their lives." I replied, "They don't go to school, they commit crimes on the daily, and all you do is issue ASBOs, antisocial behavior orders. It's time for a few real consequences. Do your job and start reading them their rights." The cops didn't like my tone, but understood my anger, and proceeded to read the kid under the bike his rights as the ambulance pulled up. They tended to the unconscious kid first, and then one broke off to help the police tend to the kid that was under the bike. As they did, their parents, who had been alerted to the situation after the police called them, showed up, driving pretty recklessly and parking in a bus stop. They ran in and looked at the yob in pain and his friend unconscious. The father asked, Why are you arresting them? They're just being stupid kids. We'll pay for the damage, I swear. I stated, I'm having them charged because they aren't going to learn any other way. You're also paying for the damage regardless of the outcome of this day. The father then said, I'll only pay for the damages if you drop the charges. Cop 1 intervened, saying, Sir, I'd advise you to pay for the damages. It might help him at sentencing. The mother chimed in and asked, How much time could he get without us paying? 4 years easy, I stated. The mother went pale. She started blubbering, saying, Why can't you let him go? He's just a kid. He's also a criminal and needs to face the consequences of his actions. For once, I replied. Now the phrase I hated most was, They're just kids. It did nothing but piss me off. Where I grew up, if you screwed up, you owned it and took the steps to make amends. No excuses, even if you were just a kid. In my book, the excuse was nothing but a cop-out, and the reason that these yobs and their friends felt emboldened to commit non-stop crimes. It was the cheapest form of entitlement, and these kids needed to learn a lesson once and for all. In the end, the kid who was unconscious was charged as an accessory to all the crimes of his cohort after waking up from a week-long coma. The other kid was charged with theft of a motor vehicle and vandalism after he got out of the hospital with a broken leg. That was before the police started taking complaints in the dozens about them and their friends, all of which were promptly rounded up and charged too. The parents paid for the damages to the bike to help reduce their sentencing and tried arguing that the kid had done enough to appease the law. In total, the kid who tried driving my motorcycle got 2 years in juvenile detention with a 3-year probation, and the kid in the coma got 6 months with 18 months probation. The rest of the kids received anything ranging from hundreds of hours of community service to 4 years in juvenile detention, based on the number of crimes they were charged with. Between the 10 of them, they racked up a grand total of 127 charges that they pleaded down to 3 charges each. Now some might think that I was harsh in all this, but 2 years on, and the 2 kids who once tried stealing my bike were finally going to school. They apologized genuinely for their criminality and are doing better. So, all in all, they learned their lessons, and they were set to try and succeed more despite their past behavior. The moral of the story is when you excuse bad behavior, it allows for entitled behavior. When you punish it, it can stop people from acting worse before they cross serious lines. The next one is an entitled parent story. So, my aunt is always going camping with her son or hiking trips with her boyfriend about every other weekend, and she never takes her dog with her. The current excuse is that she doesn't think he'll get along with her boyfriend's dog. She never takes him anywhere and always has me and my parents dog sit for her. It wouldn't be a problem if he wasn't a dog from hell. He pees on everything, is super territorial, bites people for being too close, and terrorizes my cats to the point where they are terrified of coming downstairs when he's here. When we dog sit, she rarely picks him up when she's supposed to. She's always super late to everything. She'll say she'll be here at 9 p.m., and instead, it's close to midnight when she shows up. Or she won't show up until the next day, because she or her son were too tired to swing by on their way home to get their dog. There have been several instances where she asks my dad if he can watch the dog, and even without him actually agreeing to it, she'll show up in our backyard with her dog for us to watch. She has a history of having Facebook tantrums about how she has to cancel her plans during the times we say no, and how it's so unfair to her. Well, my parents are going on a 2-week vacation at the start of August. I'm staying home to take care of the house and our pets and have plans to go to my grandma's, who lives 1.5 hours away, to do a joint birthday celebration with her since our birthdays are in the first week of the month. My aunt heard about my parents' plan for vacation last month and decided around the 4th that she is going on a vacation to the Grand Canyon with her son, her boyfriend, and his son for those same 2 weeks my parents will be having theirs. The woman had the actual gall to ask my folks to reschedule their vacation so they'd be home to babysit her dog for 2 weeks. My parents flat out refused because why should they have to reschedule their vacation for her? She refused to accept their refusal, and while we were all hanging out in my grandma's backyard, she just kept trying to persuade us. Aunt, her and her son, never get to take a vacation together out of state. I don't want to have to cancel. Dad, you don't have to cancel. You'll have to find someone or someplace to watch the dog since, wife, and I won't be here or just take him with you. Aunt, well, he's not good with these kinds of trips. Mom, Have you ever actually taken him on a trip? You don't know how well he handles these if you never take him. Aunt. Well, he probably won't get along with boyfriend's dog and he gets so mean around people. OP, you're not going so you can watch him, can't you? You don't have anything else to do. Me. No, I have plans during that time and watching him on my own is exhausting. He bit me 3 times the last time he was here, and I have to watch him like a hawk to make sure he doesn't attack my cats. Aunt. Well, the cats just hide upstairs when he's around, so they'll be fine. Me. And you think it's fair for our cats to have to hide upstairs for 2 whole weeks? One of them gets so freaked out by him just being there that she barely eats when he's around. 3 days is hard enough on her, 2 weeks is cruel. Aunt. Well, you could figure something out. I really don't want to have to take him to the kennels for 2 weeks. I don't think it's humane to keep a dog in a kennel. Are you sure you two can't push your vacation back a few weeks? It's just a lot of no's. And eventually the conversation dropped and we thought that everything was fine. But then my aunt went on her usual Facebook rants because she probably felt no one in the family would see it. Only my mom, my sister, our uncle, different aunt's husband, and his son are ever really on Facebook besides her. She went on a woe is me, the world is unfair complaint about how we're mean and that family is supposed to help each other out. So why can't we just stop being selfish and watch her dog? And if she doesn't have anyone to watch her dog, then she and her son will have to cancel plans and won't be able to go with her boyfriend and his son to the Grand Canyon. How unfair that was to them. She's also been pestering us constantly since then, the Facebook post, to see if we're suddenly available to take her dog for her. I'm honestly not going to be surprised if she just shows up in the backyard again to drop him off, regardless of being told no. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.